Okay, so of course I also only brought one big piece of watercolor paper home and forgot that I have 3 classes. So I am painting on the back side of this demo that I did. So I'm just taking a couple drips of water and plopping them into my watercolor. Making sure my phone's videoing, it is. So I'm activating my watercolors. So the big difference between acrylic paint and watercolor painting is like the watercolor paints are going to be translucent or see-through. That's the quality that you're going for. They also, you're able to layer up a little bit better than acrylic paint. It's just a totally different painting experience. So it's nice to have a few options here. The thing that I really like about watercolor painting is it's pretty like transportable. Like to have all this stuff with me, it's pretty easy. Not like acrylic paint where you really need to have like quite a bit of stuff going on. It's pretty easy with watercolor to take this like outside or, you know, just at a little table and get going. They're really cheap. The most expensive part is probably the watercolor paper. I really didn't believe that there was a big difference, but I would say summer, I took a watercolor class through college and I bought some really nice paper and oh my gosh, it was so different than like the stuff that we're working on. So the stuff that you're working on, I mean, it's better than just your average paper, but if you are interested in watercolor, I would invest in like a little bit more expensive paper because it's going to make a huge difference. I just have some little pencil lines here I'm going to erase because I'm using the back side. Okay, so to get started, you'll need your brush, your water. I like to put some paper towel down underneath my painting, and I like to have like a few pieces kind of ready to go so that in case I need to blot up the color. We're also going to use paper towel as one of our techniques. If you can get your hands on some rubbing alcohol, there's a really cool technique that creates like almost craters in a moon. So I just found this underneath the sink. I had it in my bathroom. You probably don't have this, but if you can get your hands on, if you have rubber cement at home, that creates a really nice resist. Otherwise, just masking tape works really well too. So if you can find masking tape, if you don't have any of that stuff, that's fine. You can work with washes, not a big deal. But it's kind of fun to try out some of these different techniques. Okay, what else do I need? I have a few pencils to work with. I do have some Micron pens. If you have Micron pens, it might be kind of fun to use those. So basically, we're going to try to be creating something like this, just like a little demonstration sheet that goes over about roughly 10 to 11 techniques here. Okay. So these are, I've done obviously a lot of these over the years. I usually do them in class in person, but obviously we have a virtual week this week, so we can do them from home and this should be fine. If you have masking tape, I would suggest kind of breaking the space up into 10 different areas. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is an example here of what you could do. So I kind of have like some squares and some rectangles and some triangles. If you have like regular clear tape, you could try that and see if that works. If you do not have tape, what you can do is you can just go ahead and use your pencil and you can just kind of like draw some shapes and section off this paper. Ooh. I may actually have to go with that because I found this roll of, I used my other roll of masking tape up yesterday and found this in my craft room. It's like really sticky and not, not working. I don't know how old this tape is. So isn't this fun? It's just all kinds of problem solving. Yeah, my tape is coming off in like pieces. So that's not going to work. So, hey, we'll go with it. So instead of sectioning off, I'm just going to take my pencil. Oh, I also have a straw. So if you have like a straw somewhere around your house you can use, that would be great. So I'm just going to kind of draw out some areas. Don't have to be perfect. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I've got a few extra. This piece of watercolor paper is pretty big. Like I said, I forgot to grab enough for all of my demos, so I'm just using the back of a previously made sheet here. Okay, so your watercolors should hopefully be activated now. Something I get kids asking about is like, oh, I don't have enough like yellow watercolor paint. Like there's not enough in there. The difference between watercolor and acrylic is you're not gonna need as much watercolor paint as you would acrylic. It's not the same kind of painting technique. So I know you're used to kind of like globbing big, you know, pulls of the acrylic paint, but watercolor, you want it to be almost like see-through, like a watery texture. Obviously, it's watercolor paint, so you want to use that water to your advantage. You'll also notice that you don't have any white watercolor paint. So the reason for that is you're going to be using the white of the paper. So if you want a color to be white, or you want it to be like a tint and you want it to be lighter, you're actually going to just use more water. So the water is kind of like your white, okay? So no white watercolor paint. You can also, if you make a color and it's way too dark, you can use your paper towel and you can blot it, and you can kind of pull up that color, and that will lighten your colors. Sometimes it leaves a little bit like of staining on your paper, so it might not get back to complete white, but just something to think about when we're working. Like this example here, I've got like this graded wash where it's dark to light, and it gets really, really light down here. But if you probably can't see it over the computer, but it's still not quite as white as the paper, but it's pretty light. I also used my rubber cement to make a resist. You can use tape to make a resist. So those are techniques. This is the paper towel where I blotted up the color. So there's ways that you can try to get white. You just have to kind of plan for it a little bit more than you would with acrylic painting. Okay, so we're gonna get started here. Actually, I see a few people still taping, so I'll wait a little bit longer. Hopefully you have everything. After we're done with our techniques, I am gonna talk about the 6 pieces of watercolor paper that you guys received, and you can start thinking about your ideas for your watercolor book. Remember that we're going to be assembling this during the exam week. Okay, so we'll talk about that at the end. We're gonna be making this little book. I do have my example here from many, many years ago, and it's actually falling apart because it's so old. Okay, but I did my theme on Port Washington. This is back when I taught summer school, and we did, we actually painted like on site. So we walked downtown and we did some paintings. So I'll talk about this at the end.
Hey, Fire.
Yeah.
Bethany raised her hand.
Oh, I don't think I can see Bethany. Bethany, do you have a question? Oh, now I see your little hand there. What's up? Hi, I love that you have your own watercolors.
Oh, yes. How many spaces do we tape off again?
I would say about 10. It doesn't have to be exact. What we'll do is as these techniques dry, we kind of layer them up. So I have like my flat wash with my straw blown tree on top. I also have my wet into wet technique with my splatter on top. So we can layer them up. It doesn't have to be perfect or exact.
And then also Jean is here with me.
Hi, Jean.
Hi.
This is so fun, and I see Mrs. Olds. Just check my, bit recorded.
Everybody, good morning.
Good morning. Allison's here. Yay. So what I'm going to do is I am recording this on my phone. So after this class is over, I do have computer graphics, but that one it should be pretty quick. So if you miss anything or you're coming in a little bit late and you're behind, I will post this video so that you guys can rewatch it if you need to. And then I can have it up for my 8th hour also. Yesterday, I had a couple kids. They were really good with sticking with the techniques, but then at the end, when I went through the labeling, they thought I went a little bit too fast. So I do have some pictures up on the PS Learning page. Did I see someone else raise their hand? Did I see Allison raise her hand? Feel free to just interrupt me.
I did not mean to do that.
Okay. You can just interrupt me. Everything I say isn't that important. All right, so
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Claire.
What if our tape like rips up the paper?
Oh, great question. Not the end of the world. I don't know if you can see on here, but my tape actually ripped up the paper right here. Because this is just a technique sheet, it's not anything of major importance. I wouldn't worry about it. But that is something to know about watercolor. Like if you're doing a painting at home, you're probably not really going to need to tape these 6 little pieces unless you want to do a border, you can, but they're so small you don't really need to. But depending how sticky your tape is, it might accidentally rip your watercolor paper. So a few things you can do. You can try to peel like really, really slowly and carefully. Another thing is sometimes I'll take my masking tape and like kind of push it on my clothing to get like a little bit of lint on there so that the tape isn't quite as sticky. Jeans work really well for that. People don't wear jeans anymore. You all wear leggings. So maybe like a cotton shirt, and you can make that tape not quite as sticky. Okay, so I'm gonna get started. We've got our watercolors activated with the water in them. The first technique we're gonna do is pretty easy. It is a flat wash. Let me see if I can find a good example. This example is this kind of red one in the middle here. I do have the straw blowing technique on top. So we're just gonna be trying to create one square that is just full color without any variation. I do like to custom mix my own colors. So the top of the tray here, you can actually use as your own watercolor palette. So I like to make my own colors here. So I've got like a red orange still from yesterday that I'm just gonna add some water to. And I'm just gonna take my brush with quite a bit of water in there, and I'm just going to literally paint one of my areas in. My goal is to make this all even. So I wanna make sure I have enough water that this is flowy. You don't want it to be like stiff and kind of scratchy looking. You want it to flow nice. Okay, sometimes you have to make a couple passes to kind of even things out. And then you're just gonna kind of let it sit and dry. Okay, so just flat wash, pretty simple, right? So if you're trying to create like a background color, let's say you're trying to paint just a plain blue sky, you could do just a flat wash to create that. Okay, then I just kind of dip my brush in some water and use my paper towel and just kind of dry it off so I'm ready for a new color. Let's see. Let's do the gradiated wash into water. So that's this corner one right here. So we're actually going to be going from a color and we're going to try to go into like the white of the paper. So we're going to take a color and we're going to paint, I would say about halfway on that area. And then we're going to add water and then continue to paint. And then we're going to add a little bit more water. So we're going to go from color to lighter to even lighter. And this can be any color that you want. So I'm going to pick this kind of green color. Because my masking tape wasn't working, I'm actually not going to do the square right next to this wash that I did, just because these colors are going to blend together. If you're using masking tape, you can paint right next to the one you did. But I'm going to do this triangle over here just so that my orange doesn't blend into my green. So I'm just going to paint about half of this triangle with the green, and then with my brush I'm going to dip it in the water and I'm just going to kind of continue down with that green. So it should almost lighten that up a little bit, and then I'm going to add some more water. And I'm just kind of pulling that green out to the corner. It's kind of subtle. We'll see if I can kind of hold it up here. I picked a light color, so it might be kind of hard to see. So I went from green to a pale green. That might be nice, like if you're doing like a sunset or a sunrise and you need that color to kind of like flow out. You don't want it to be all one color. That might work really well. This is another example of a graded wash. So I went from the brown to like a very light tan. So that's going to be your gradiated wash using water. So color to a tint of a color. So almost like where you would add white, but we don't have white. So we're adding water as our white so that that white of the paper shows through. Let's see, what can we do next? I think the next one we'll do is another gradiated wash, but instead of going into just the water, we're gonna go into a second color. So this is an example of a gradiated wash. So I went from purple and I transitioned into like a brown color. Okay, so purple into brown for a gradiated wash using color. Again, because I don't have masking tape separating my colors, I'm gonna pick an area that isn't touching my red and my green because I don't want them to blend together. Let's see, I'm gonna make like a teal. Like a teal blue. Add more green into that. So I'll do this area right here. So I'm gonna do about half of my area with the teal blue, and then I'm going to switch to a second color. Usually this works best if you pick a color that's near the color on the color wheel. So from teal, you know, maybe I don't want to go to like orange because those are opposite colors on the color wheel. So maybe I want to go from teal to, let's say, yellow. So then I can do yellow over here. And then when they meet in the middle, I can kind of try to fan that out and it should create a pretty nice looking green because teal plus yellow would equal green. Sometimes that transition isn't the greatest, so feel free to like maybe add a little bit more water, and I'm just kind of painting left to right just to kind of like fan that out. So you're probably noticing with watercolor, it's a little bit more, actually it's a lot more unpredictable than acrylic paint. So the water kind of gives you a surface that you can't really control. Okay, the more water you use, the less control you have. So some people who use watercolor paint use just like a little tiny bit of water, and it's really easy to kind of get detail and to really get those areas clean. Like, let's see, for this example here where I did these flags, you can see that I used like just a little tiny bit of watercolor so that that wouldn't go all over the place. So there are situations where you can do things very controlled. There's also situations though where you can get a little bit crazier, like this one right here where I did the trees and the bushes, where you can kind of let that paint flow a little bit more, because if you think about it, trees and bushes, they're, you know, nature, they're organic. They're not so like perfect and exact like a man-made flag. So I could kind of paint that a little bit with less control, you know, or like kind of like this one, the contrast of the lighthouse here. Okay, the lighthouse I had to paint with control because it was man-made. Those areas needed to be really like straight. But that background, the water and the sky, I was able to kind of let the water flow and create some cool kind of wet into wet techniques. All right, so this is my gradiated wash from teal into yellow. I've got a nice green in between. That kind of rhymed. All right, let's see. We could do the wet into wet next. This is one of my favorite techniques, but it's the most like uncontrollable. So sometimes it turns out really cool and you're never able to like recreate it. And then sometimes it turns out really terrible. You never really know. So I'm gonna use two colors that are pretty different from each other. So sometimes like a light color with a dark color work kind of cool. So I'm just gonna take my brush and fill it with some water. I think I'll go to this corner here. And I'm gonna just paint one of my squares in just with water. So no color, just pure water. And if your water has a little bit of a tint to it, that's fine. Like if it's got a little kind of like orangey color or purple or whatever. Then I'm gonna take a color. So I'm gonna take this purple. So I've got like kind of a dark purple. And I'm just gonna kind of drip kind of dots of purple into my wet square. Or for me, it's a triangle, into my wet triangle. Okay, then I'm gonna clean my brush and then I'm gonna go in with my red-orange color. And I'm just gonna kind of drip. And you'll see, it's almost like a tie-dye effect where it like starts like spreading. So that's called a wet into wet. And you can do like 3 colors, you can do 2 colors, you can do 1 color. But it's kind of a fun, different technique to try. This one, you really have to wait for it to dry to see what it ends up looking like. Let's see. That technique doesn't look that good. This one's kind of cool, the wet into wet. So this one I did like a maroon into like kind of a gray. So that one's right down here, wet into wet. So I went kind of crazy with my colors on that, but it's kind of fun. It's this bottom corner one right here. So I'm gonna let that dry. Where those colors mixed, it did kind of turn into a brown, but whatever. I like the color brown. Not that big of a deal. This is just practice, by the way. If you want to do something with this at the end, you can, but it's really just for practice. All right, so we just did the wet into wet. I think the next one I'm gonna do, because this one needs a little bit of time to dry, if you have rubber cement at home, I'm gonna have you whip that open, or if you have like a few pieces of tape, you could use some tape, like I've got a little schnibble of masking tape. So we're gonna create a resist in one of these squares. So I'm just gonna take a piece of masking tape, a small one, and I'm just gonna kind of like tape off a few little tiny areas inside one of my squares. If you don't have tape, you could do another flat wash in this square instead, that's fine. I have myself this really cool liquid mask.
Can't you use like a white crayon?
Yeah, you could, yeah, if you have a white crayon or like maybe even candle wax, you could try candle wax. That might be kind of fun. Oh, thanks, Mrs. Olds. I got your message. I'm just going to use the end of one of my paint brushes, the hard end, and I'm just going to take my liquid mask, which is pretty much like rubber cement, and I'm just going to kind of drizzle a few little swirly whirls in here. I don't even know. I think I got this from like Michael's or something years and years ago. So I know most of you don't have this. If we were in class, you'd be able to borrow it, but that's okay. We'll just do what we have. If you have a white crayon, if you have like a piece of candle wax, if you have masking tape, if you have rubber cement. So I'm gonna let that dry and then we'll go back to that square in a few minutes. Actually, I'm gonna spread this out a little bit more so that it dries. Yesterday when I did this demo, I left it pretty clumpy and it took a long time to dry. So I'll learn from my mistake. Let's do the paper towel technique next. So you're gonna need just like a piece of paper towel. It doesn't need to be big. It can actually be just like a tiny little schnibble like this, that's fine. So we're just gonna do a flat wash in one of your squares and you're gonna use your paper towel with that wet, the square wet, and you're just gonna kind of dab up some of that paint. So I'll show you what that looks like. Where is a good example? This one's a good example. So I did a flat wash with green and I just pulled up, that one's right down here, green with some paper towel. And it should kind of make it look like clouds, kind of. So if you want to do like a blue color, that might be kind of cool. I think I'll use this kind of purpley. So I'm just going to do a flat wash. So I'm just going to fill in my whole area. Let's see, I'm kind of running out of areas that aren't next to each other that are wet. I'll come over here. And this watercolor paper is huge. So I'm going to do a flat wash. So I'm going to need a lot more color in my brush. And with this still wet, I'm going to use my paper towel and just kind of blot up some areas. The more you blot, the lighter that's going to become. If you try to do this when your watercolor is dry, nothing is going to blot up because there's nothing to blot. So sometimes you have to kind of re-wet it if it's not blotting. And then you just take your paper towel and kind of blot. And you can change the shape of this paper towel. You can turn it into like a little point. Okay, or you can keep it big and fluffy and you can just kind of dot around. Okay, you can do like a lot of areas. You can do just like a little area. It's up to you. I really love to use the paper towel technique throughout like all of my watercolor. So most of the time, like when I'm painting, like this church example here, and I layer up my colors, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, it's way too dark. Like, what was I thinking? I'll just take paper towel and like quick blot it up, like, oh, mistake. So paper towel with watercolor is really, really important. It's kind of like an eraser with pencil. That's what paper towel is for watercolor paint.
Miss Byron?
Yeah.
So I accidentally got, like, I spilled water on my paper.
Yep, that happens.
I'm just letting it dry. Can I just, like, continue to watch?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yep, sometimes that happens too. So if that happens, obviously your paper is really saturated. So when you try to put color in it, it's just going to bleed everywhere. So you definitely want that to dry before you start doing your techniques. Otherwise, it's just going to be like a big mess. But yeah, that happens.
So are you going to make another video about
Yeah, I'm actually recording it right now. I've got my phone right up here on my little stick thing.
Okay, so then I can just watch that and do it.
Yes. Yep, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, I think the next one, so we just did the wash. I think we'll do the sgraffito one next. So if you've taken ceramics, you've probably heard this term before. So in ceramics, when you work with clay and you put a glaze over the top of that, so the clay isn't fired, so you're still able to carve into it, and you put a layer of underglaze on that clay, and then you use like a sharp tool to carve out that clay and that glaze. That's called a sgraffito carving. So it's really where you're subtracting or you're like showing another layer. So we can do that with paint. Not gonna lie, this technique doesn't work the greatest with me. I think it's because our watercolor paper is kind of cheap. But anything kind of sharp, you can use like the end of a paintbrush would work. I've got like a number 2 mechanical pencil here, and I'm just gonna like push the lead up, and I can use this because this is kind of sharp. Needles work well. Really, like anything that you're able to like make a dent in the watercolor. Your fingernail, you could even use your fingernail, that would work. And you're just going to kind of draw in a design or write something, or even just make like some texture marks. So I think I'm just gonna do like some diagonal lines. So you're just kind of making like an impression into your watercolor paper. Obviously, the harder you press, the darker those lines are going to be. So what usually happens, and this technique doesn't show up really well, it's kind of more faint and subtle. So it's really hard for me to show you guys on over the computer. Actually, like none of these are gonna show up, I don't think. But what happens is when you put a wash over the top of this, the color is gonna kind of sink into those areas that are impressed down. And when it dries, those areas are gonna be a little bit darker, like maybe a shade or 2 darker. So let's try it out. So I just impressed a bunch of just lines. I just pressed in some lines in here, and then I'm just gonna go over this whole rectangle or this whole triangle with a flat wash. So I think I'm gonna do like a red orange. I'm liking the red orange today for some reason. Whoops. Got some paint on my mom's table. Wipe that off. And I'm just gonna do a flat wash over the top of this. And actually this one worked out pretty well. So the color is kind of falling into those crevices. So this is called sgraffito. It's an Italian word. It probably means something like to carve. I'll have to Google that and look up what the meaning is. But I'm gonna kind of have to let that dry before I can show you guys. Oh, maybe you can kind of see it, I'm not sure. But it's this orange one right in the middle, and I did just some line work. Like I said, sometimes this technique is kind of lame. I think it's the paper that we have doesn't work that great, but it's another technique that you can try out. This would work great if you wanted to add in like a little bit of texture. Like maybe if you're painting like, let's say a roof and you wanted to do some texture in there, you could do that. Or maybe even like bricks. You could maybe carve a little bit sgraffito carving in there before you laid your flat wash down. Might be kind of fun. Another technique we can do is salt. This one, oh, I have to go grab my table salt. I'll be right back. Had to make sure I grabbed the salt and not the pepper. So I've just got regular old table salt. And you just need like a few little grains there. But we're going to do a flat wash, and we're just gonna kind of sprinkle the salt on top of that flat wash. And what's gonna happen is it's going to, the salt is going to pull that color, and it's going to absorb some of that color. So it's gonna create this orange one right here is my salt technique. So it's going to create a little bit of like a variation in that wash. The salt is like a really fun, easy technique. Most people have salt, so that's something that hopefully you're able to participate in. Oh, I got an email. Okay, so I'm gonna do a flat wash. And then I'm just gonna sprinkle some salt in there. The amount doesn't really matter. Even if you just have like a couple little grains, it'll still work. The only bad thing about the salt technique is you need to let it dry. So I'm just gonna kind of sprinkle these salt grains on the top of my flat wash. And I can see that the salt is pulling the color to the salt. So when that dries, it's going to create like little speckles or little flecks. This is a great technique, like if you're, for your watercolor book, if you want to do like under the sea and you want to create like little bubbles, that's kind of fun. Or if you're doing anything that has like kind of dotted texture, gravel, I don't know, spots, you might want to use the salt technique. Or even just if you're doing a wash and you want to create some variation, you can just sprinkle some salt in there. So at the end of the class, we can rub that salt off, but you want that salt to dry before you rub it, because otherwise you're just gonna rub and create salt water. All right, so that's a salt technique. If you can get your hands on a little bit of rubbing alcohol, this next technique is one of my favorite ones. So hopefully you have some. If you don't, you can do just a flat wash, or you could try like a gradiated wash, that's fine. I found this underneath my bathroom sink. So if you have some, great. We're gonna do, you guessed it, a flat wash. And then I just like to use the end of my paintbrush and I just kind of dab in some little spots of rubbing alcohol. So this purple example on the top is what that looks like. Similar to the salt, it's gonna create a resist, but it's gonna create almost like crater-like resist. So I think I'm gonna do like a brown color, and I'll do this corner right up here. Gosh, this piece of watercolor paper I have is pretty big, so this is taking me a while to get a wash going. When I'm working with watercolor, I actually like to work small because there's so much layering that needs to occur when you watercolor paint that if you do a really big painting, for me, it's really kind of difficult. So smaller for me is better personally for watercolor. Okay, so I'm just gonna take the end of my paintbrush and I'm just gonna kind of drip in a few drops of rubbing alcohol. Doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of let it flow. And you're gonna notice immediately that the paint is gonna like run away from the rubbing alcohol. It's like oil and water. They do not wanna mix. And it's gonna create a little bit of like a gray color at first. That's just the rubbing alcohol kind of reacting with the paper. But once that dries, that gray actually turns to the white of the paper, which is kind of cool. So I've done that technique several times. So I've done it here with the brown, which is kind of neat. It looks like craters of the moon. I guess I really like doing the rubbing alcohol with brown. I've got another brown example. Oh my God, I've got another brown example. This is not planned. Ooh, I have a purple one for this one. So the rubbing alcohol. It works with all colors. So go ahead and let that one dry. What can we do next? We've got the splatter technique. We've got the dry brush. We should probably do dry brush next. We have the straw blowing technique, and then I still have to do a wash over my masking tape and my resist here. Maybe I'll do that one next. If you put down a few pieces of masking tape, or like I put down my masking fluid, and mine's pretty dry here, I'm just gonna do a flat wash over the top of that. Let's see, what color do I wanna do? We'll do a red-orange.
I only have one square left.
Oh, if you just have one square left, I'm gonna have you use that one for the dry brush. We'll do that one next.
Okay.
And then the other ones we're actually gonna be layering on top. So like the straw blowing technique, you can do that one over the top of your flat wash, or you could do that one over the top of like one of your gradiated washes that we did in the beginning. You could also do your dry brush over the top of one of those washes. So you can double up techniques. So for me, like the splatter, so I did the gradiated wash, and then I did the splatter technique over the top. And then I did the flat wash, and I did the straw blowing technique over the top. So you can layer them up. I actually did that pretty much in all of them. I layered up my splatter, and I layered up my straw blowing technique, because I think that's usually how we end up. Splatter over the top, straw blowing on top. I just have a few extra spots because my paper was so big. So I just did a flat wash over my masking tape and my resist so that can dry, and then I can peel that off later. Let's do the dry brushing. So some of you have already done dry brushing with acrylic paint, same exact concept. So you almost want to start with like a dry brush. So I take my brush and I kind of wipe it off, and I kind of like flare those bristles out so it looks kind of like a scraggly brush. You don't want it to be all nice and tapered. You want it to almost look like a tail of a horse. And I don't like to use a lot of water, so sometimes I'll just like even dip into one of like just my plain colors. So actually I've got like a brown that's kind of dried a little bit, and I just kind of get the ends a little bit wet, and you can even kind of brush it off on a piece of paper towel if you have too much water. And I'm gonna do my dry brushing over the top of one of these. I'm going to do my dry brushing over the top of my gradiated wash. And I'm just going to kind of brush lightly over the top. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to create some texture. So to me, this looks almost like fur. So if I was like painting a dog or a cat, I might want to use the dry brush technique. Or if I was painting like branches or grass. So I'll hold mine up here. So I did my dry brush over the top of the green. So it can look like fur. Here's another dry brush example right down here. It can look like fur. It can look like straw. Oh, I've got 7 minutes left. I don't know why my phone stopped taping. So for labeling these techniques, you can use a pencil. You can use, if you have like a Micron pen, or if you have a skinny Sharpie, you can use that. If you're still peeling your tape off, that's fine. So we're just gonna go through, and next to your techniques, we're just going to go ahead and label. So we're gonna just write down what technique we did next to each area. I don't have a lot of space in between because my masking tape didn't work. So I'm just gonna write kind of on the corner of each of my techniques. So we did a flat wash, we did 2 gradiated washes, one with water, one with color. We did salt, we did wet into wet, we did splatter, the straw blown tree, we did the rubber cement, we did the paper towel, the rubbing alcohol, sgraffito, dry brush. So we're just gonna go through and we are going to label these. Try your best, maybe process of elimination. If you're not sure what you did for what square, maybe leave that one blank and come back to it at the end. Sometimes it's hard to remember. So I'm gonna start with the first one that I did, which was my red area here, and that was just a flat wash. So I'm just gonna go ahead and write flat wash next to or on that area. Okay, so I've got my flat wash. And then after that, we did the gradiated wash using water. So that should be your color, and it should flow into like a tint of your next color. For me, I did that green into a pale green. So this one I'm gonna call my gradiated wash. So gradiated is GRADIED. Wash, and then in parentheses, I'm just gonna write the word water because I did a gradiated wash into water. The next one we did was a gradiated wash, and we went from color to a second color. So for me, I did teal into that yellow, and it created a green in between. So this one is my gradiated wash, GRADIED. Gradiated wash. In parentheses, I'm going to write the word color because that's where I went from one color to a second color. After that one, I think we did the wet into wet. So that's this kind of like almost tie-dye looking one. So this one is just called wet into wet. So you should have like a couple different colors. This is the one that we painted with the water, and then we just dripped in color. After the wet into the wet, I think we did the paper towel technique. So that's my purple one right here, where it kind of looks like clouds are kind of dabbed into there. So this one I can just call paper towel. Hopefully you can hear me with the sink on full blast over there in the kitchen. Then I think we did the salt technique. So that's the one that has the little granules of salt. Go ahead and label that one salt. Then I think we did the sgraffito carving one. So for me, it's this one right here where I kind of pressed in those lines with my mechanical pencil. So sgraffito is kind of hard to spell because it's Italian. It's S-G-R-A-F-I-T-O. R A F F I T O. SGRAFFITO. Sgraffito carving. Then I think we probably did the rubbing alcohol. So that's the one that has like the craters of the moon. Rubbing alcohol. Then we probably did the dry brushing. So for me, I did my dry brushing on top of my gradiated wash. I'm just gonna write dry brushing on the other side here. Dry brush. Then I did probably the splatter paint. Again, I did my splatter paint on top of my gradiated wash. I can just write splatter paint on the other corner. So splatter. We did the straw blowing technique. So I'm going to write that down here in this corner. And then just the masking tape and the fluid resist. So I'm going to write for mine masking tape. / fluid resist. Okay, so you should have all of them sort of labeled onto your piece of paper. If you weren't able to finish this up, you could definitely take some time and get that finished, get that labeled. If you are done, just go ahead and take your phone, just snap a picture. I'm gonna have you upload the picture of your techniques into our Google Classroom stream. So just go right to Google Classroom, just create a post, just throw in the picture of your techniques. This does not have to be absolutely perfect, you know, gorgeous. We're practicing here, okay? So I don't expect it to be, you know, a work of art that you're gonna hang in a museum. But I just wanna kind of see what you guys were able to do. So at some point today, take a picture, post that for us to kind of take a look at. And then these last few minutes, I'm just gonna talk about the watercolor book, because you guys are kind of like ready to start that now that you've done your techniques. So you should have 6 pieces of small watercolor paper, okay? In the past, I did have my students tape those pieces of watercolor paper down on a board.